All right, what's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm gonna be doing a Q&A. It's been a while since I've done one of these. So yesterday I went out on Instagram and recruited you guys for some questions, and I got a bunch of them, so I'm gonna do my best to answer as many as I can in this video. I've got some pre-workout over here. I'm gonna sip on this as I go through the questions, and then I'm gonna hit an arm workout just after this. So I'll probably overlay some clips from that workout up here. Oh, and just a quick recap. So I'm actually still running a full body split every other week. So right now I alternate with a full body week and an upper lower week. And then I've got one roaming hypertrophy day where I'll go in and hit any body parts that I feel like didn't get quite enough volume on either of those weeks. So that's what we're hitting today. So anyway, let's get started with the first question. Do you think wearing a mask has impacted your performance at all? So this is a good question. I get asked this so much because I do wear a mask a nice bit in the gym. So just for context, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida right now, and cases here are pretty high, and the gym that I train at requires that you wear a mask when walking into the gym and when walking around in the gym, but you don't have to wear a mask when you're actually exercising. I often will still wear a mask when I'm actually lifting, just because, to answer the question, no, I don't really find it impacts my performance much at all. And I don't wanna, for one, constantly be fiddling with my mask, because that can increase risk of transmission as well. Also, if there happens to be anyone else around, I'd rather just kind of be safe than sorry. But if there is nobody else around, like if the gym is empty, which it often is when I train, then I won't wear a mask in that instance. So in some clips, I might be wearing a mask, in some others I might not. But in general, no, I don't find it to be that big of a deal. The reason is probably because most of my compound work comes in a lower rep range. So it's very rare that on the most fatiguing exercises, so like squats, bench presses, deadlifts, etc., I'm usually not going over 8, maybe 10 reps. It's not that cardio intensive to begin with, so your breathing just shouldn't really be a limiting factor, even if it's a bit inhibited. And then if I do any high rep isolation work is not that hard anyway. One exception was when I had to do a set of 8 on squats, and for rep 7 and 8, trying to get that big breath of air in from my Valsalva was pretty brutal. So I could see the mask being an issue, obviously potentially when doing cardio. And if you do like CrossFit style training where you're doing high reps and lots of compound exercises. But for the way I train, it hasn't really been a big deal. And if you guys are interested in more on like the science behind masks and working out and all that, I'll link a really good article by Dr. Carl Junot down below, which kind of goes through what the medical and scientific consensus is right now on exercising with masks. But for me, I tend to take a better safe than sorry approach, especially if it's not really impeding my training to begin with. Okay. How do you cope with losing strength when cutting? I try focusing on RPE and not the numbers. So I think a lot of people just accept it as a conclusion that you're gonna lose strength when you cut. I feel like that's already kind of the wrong way to look at it. I think that most people, by far, shouldn't lose strength when they're cutting. A possible exception to that would be people who are trying to get contest lean, so like below 8% body fat, or people who are really overweight and it just ends up changing their leverages so much. So if you were like a really heavy power lifter and you dropped a bunch of weight classes, you'll lose some strength. But for most people who are just trying to get, say, beach lean, you really shouldn't lose strength throughout that cut. And if you are losing strength, it's an indication that you're doing something wrong. That could be something that you're doing wrong with your diet or with your training. So with your diet, if you wanna reduce strength loss as much as possible, you wanna diet more slowly. So you should only lose about 1% of body weight per week as a maximum. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that would be about 2, maybe 2.5 pounds per week to help maintain your strength. Also, when it comes to diet, don't cut carbs completely or do really extreme stuff with your diet. That is when you start to see strength loss, and then when strength loss comes, muscle loss tends to follow. When it comes to your training, don't change everything drastically. A lot of people will start just doing machines and really high rep stuff and forget about the basic strength training that actually built their muscle to begin with. So I'm really big on trying to maintain strength for as long as possible into your cut. Another potential thing to keep in mind in your specific instance would be to consider reducing your volume, because at a certain point, as you get leaner, you only have so much ability to recover to go around. And I would much rather see you direct that recovery capacity toward keeping a tensile stimulus on the muscle. That means maintaining whatever weight it was you were using on those exercises before you started cutting. I would rather see you direct recovery toward that than toward just doing a lot of volume. So a good strategy to help maintain muscle would be to reduce your volume. Even reduce your volume as much as a half of what you were doing before, if it means it's gonna allow you to maintain your strength. And then the second part of your question, you said you focus mostly on RPE and not the numbers. I think it is smart to focus on RPE, but RPE might start to change for you as you cut, just because your workouts might start to suck a bit more. So what used to feel like, say, an RPE of 8 or an RPE of 9 when you were bulking, that might feel a lot worse now that you're cutting. And if you just exclusively rely on RPE, you might start stopping at a true RPE of 6, and just because you feel worse, you might say, oh, that was an 8 or a 9. And then that can really accumulate to lead to strength loss over time. So RPE is good, but you just might need to recalibrate it now that you're cutting and figure out, okay, this is what a true RPE 10 feels like, or this is what a true RPE 9 feels like now that I'm cutting, and then use that as your gauge, because I could see that being a slippery slope and end up leading to more strength loss than what you should see. So I would say you need to focus on both. You do want to compare your numbers to what you were doing before and try to maintain those the best you can, but you also want to pay attention to your RPE, and that means potentially updating your software in your head of what it is that each value means on that RPE scale for you now that you're cutting. Okay, that's my full answer for that. Okay, advice for someone who is starting to lift for the first time. So I really like this question. I think it's really important. In my channel, and I would say most content creators out there, tend to focus more on the intermediate to advanced stuff because it's just kind of more interesting. What works for beginners is the basics, and you can only cover the basics so much until it kind of starts to get boring for us, but that doesn't make it any less important. So what I decided to do, I actually reached out to my friend who runs the channel Picture Fit, which I would imagine many of you guys are subscribed to. If you're not, you should. His channel is fantastic. And we're gonna collaborate on a video covering everything you need to know as a beginner. Very briefly, like I said, you need to focus on the basics and you need to focus on balance. So the basics, all that means is you pick a handful of fundamental movement patterns, master the technique on the exercises that train those movement patterns, and just progressively get stronger with them over time. You don't need to be constantly switching it up, and you probably shouldn't follow or copy exercises that you see on Instagram or even here on YouTube, because a lot of the people who run those accounts are more advanced, and so they tend to put out more advanced content, which might not be appropriate for you. So as a beginner, really quickly, there are 6 main types of movements that you need to include in your routine. I'll just put them here next to my head and you can pause and read them if you're interested. As a beginner, a very good routine would be to just pick one exercise for each of these 6 key movement patterns, and that would be your full body workout. So do 2 to 3 sets of each exercise and then repeat that full body workout 2 to 3 times a week. And that's really all that you need to do. If you want to sprinkle in a little bit of extra calf work, a little bit of extra ab work, that's good. But the key for you should be mastering the movement patterns. Learn how to do a squat type movement. Learn how to do a goblet squat if the squat intimidates you. Learn how to do a hip hinge type movement. So learn how to deadlift. Get better at that over time. If the deadlift is intimidating at first, you can do a Romanian deadlift, or you can do a lower back extension to begin with. But you need to master those basic techniques on the basic movement patterns and stick to that for a while. And then later on, you can start doing the more advanced stuff. You can start doing fancy exercise variations and intensity techniques and increase your volume later. A lot of beginners want to jump to the high volume stuff right away because they want to get results as fast as possible. But then what are you going to do a year or 2 down the road when you plateau? If you start with high volume, you've got nowhere to increase once you actually hit a wall. So that's what I mean by starting on the basics. The other thing is you need to focus on balance. So a lot of guys tend to focus on arms and pecs when they first start in the gym, and that can lead to a really disproportionate, unbalanced physique later down the road. You need to train the whole body, and the same thing goes for women. Women tend to only train their glutes and maybe their abs. You really need to focus on the full body, and that's going to allow you to have that base strength and size that you can then specialize on later. So the specialization comes later. At the beginning, just focus on the basics and achieving balance with your training. One other thing to keep in mind as a beginner is sometimes it takes time for muscle growth to occur. So it's really common for hypertrophy to be delayed by a month or maybe 2 months. So you might start training and a month can feel like a long time, and you might be like, okay, I'm getting a bit stronger, but I don't see any new muscle tissue. I don't seem like I'm growing at all. But that's completely normal. Neurological adaptation usually precedes hypertrophic adaptation. So there is usually this lag. So you just have to be patient, continue to get strong. That's a good sign that you're making progress. And then after a month or two, you'll start seeing the muscle come on. And you guys can stay tuned for that video with Picture Fit. It'll be really good. Okay, I'm gonna do one more question, then I'm gonna hit my workout and we'll continue after. So last question for now, does muscle fiber type, so type 1 or type 2 muscle fibers, affect how many reps per set are more effective for that muscle? So I think this is a really good question. I think people who are somewhat familiar with the science would say yes. So type 1 or slow twitch muscle fibers would respond better to high rep sets with light weights, and type 2 muscle fibers or fast twitch muscle fibers would respond better to heavier weights for lower reps. And I used to think this too. I remember when I first got into training, I heard that the hamstrings were very type 2 or fast twitch dominant. And so I was told you need to train them with heavy weight for low reps. In reality, I think this is all mostly just a bunch of noise, because almost every muscle that we care about developing is pretty much an even split of type 1 and type 2. So like the quads are almost a perfect 50-50 split. The hamstrings are slightly more type 2 dominant, at least according to one study, but it's still like 60-40. So even on that logic of allocating rep counts based on fiber type distribution, you would still want to use a combination of reps for the hamstrings, and pretty much every other muscle is almost roughly even 50-50. So practically speaking, the best advice is to not really worry about the muscle fiber type and just train with both high reps and low reps, and probably most of your work should come in that middle rep range. It's gonna hit a combination of both. Now, I wanna say, if you wanna dig into the science a little bit more, there's actually research showing that type 1, so slow twitch muscle fibers, respond well to both high reps and low reps. So the mechanistic theory doesn't really seem to work out when you study it over the long term. And the same thing goes for type 2 fibers, respond well to high reps and low reps. So using a combination is almost always the best thing to do. One possible exception to that I actually apply in my own training is the calves. The soleus muscle, which sits under the gastroc muscle, is, according to some studies, as much as 90% type 1 or slow twitch. So that means if there's any theoretical basis for using higher reps on type 1 dominant muscles, it would apply to the soleus. So if you're training calves exclusively in, say, I don't know, the 6 to 12 rep range, you could be missing out on some calf growth. And for me personally, I'll usually do pretty high reps, close to failure, if not to failure, on seated calf raises. They can be standing. You can do high reps on standing as well. They'll both target the soleus, but you want to make sure you're doing some sets that use reps at least 15 to 25 in there for your calf training. I think that if you're going to give the theory any merit at all, you'd want to apply it to the calves, and everything else is pretty much an even 50-50 split anyway, so I don't think there's much there to worry about, to be honest. Okay, I'm gonna do one more really quick, and then we're gonna go do a workout. So this one is, can you take creatine while losing fat? Now, I've talked about creatine, everything you need to know about creatine I did in another video, but I still get questions about this almost every day. So it means that people are still a bit confused about creatine. So creatine is stored almost exclusively in muscle tissue and to a lesser extent in the brain. So there's no reason why you'd want to stop taking creatine while cutting, because any water retention that comes as a result of creatine supplementation is gonna be inside the muscle or maybe a little bit in the brain. So I actually don't know about that, but it's definitely gonna be in the muscle, not just kind of floating around under your skin. So it's not gonna make you look any more bloated or watery. It's just gonna make your muscles fuller, which could actually have the opposite effect. It's gonna cause your muscles to push out against the skin a little bit more and probably result in a tighter appearance. So no, you never need to come off creatine. You can just take 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate a day, every day for the rest of your life. It's associated with a bunch of other positive health effects, cognitive effects, general metabolic effects, and obviously increased strength and muscle mass. So it's a supplement that I strongly endorse. I mean, it's not magical. It's not gonna do everything under the sun for you, but it's definitely worth taking, and there's decades of research showing its safety, and your body doesn't grow desensitized to it. So unlike caffeine, which you'll become desensitized to over time, that doesn't happen with creatine. You can just treat it like any other nutrient or any other nutritive supplement, like a protein powder. You can just take it every day and just continue to take it, and it doesn't really matter about anything else. So don't sweat those little details when it comes to creatine. It's pretty simple. All right, that's gonna be a wrap for this segment of it. I'm gonna go hit an arm workout, and I will check in with you guys and answer a couple more questions after. Let's go.
Fun house active, king of the palace. crunching the numbers and bringing out.
So guys, we just finished up with the arm workout, and occasionally what I'll do, there's this outdoor basketball court in our neighborhood here, so sometimes I'll come out here and shoot a couple shots if I'm feeling good after my workout. So that workout today wasn't too taxing. Like I said, it's mostly just kind of the leftover muscles that I didn't hit quite so much throughout the week. So get a little bit of cardio in, and as I'm shooting, I'll answer the rest of the questions you guys got. All right, this is a controversial question. Are there any machines or exercises to avoid for being injury prone? Heard that bench press and hip abduction machine are unsafe. So this opinion will bother some people, but I think no. I don't think there are any exercises that are inherently so harmful to the point that you need to avoid doing them, generally speaking. I don't think there are any contraindicated exercises. I just think there are contraindicated people from certain exercises. So for example, if you have a history of knee pain, it might not be a good idea for you to do a whole bunch of leg extensions. But I think the bigger problem around this question is that you have so many personal trainers who are telling you all these different exercises that you shouldn't do because they're dangerous. And I think that that can be a real problem, because it can instill the idea in people that if they do this exercise, they're probably going to hurt themselves. And the general consensus in the pain science and medical community right now is that instilling that fear in people is more likely to be dangerous than the exercise most likely is on its own anyway. It's something called the nocebo effect. So most of you guys have probably heard of the placebo effect. Basically, that's when you give someone a sugar pill. It doesn't actually have any medicinal properties, but when they take it, they suddenly start to feel better because they believe that it's working. They were told by some authority figure that it works. Well, the nocebo effect is kind of like the inverse of that. It's when someone tells you this is gonna actively harm you, and so you become so psychologically fearful of it that it does end up becoming more likely to harm you, or you think that it's actually harming you when it really isn't. And I think this happens all the time in our community with so many different exercises. With that said, I think there are a few things to be aware of and that you should be mindful of. One is so-called functional exercises. So exercises like Bosu ball squats, Bosu ball curls, or where like you stand on a yoga ball and do an exercise. I'm not saying it doesn't have any application in any athletic context, but for the vast majority of people who are just looking to build strength and build size, that's just increasing the risk of the exercise without any real additional benefit. If you want to get more functional, get stronger on basic compound movements, and that's going to improve your functionality in pretty much any daily activity that you probably do, and it'll be more effective at building size and strength. So I'd like to see a lot more people training with stable surfaces rather than unstable surfaces. I talked about that in another video. And when it comes to dangerous exercises, I would say the most dangerous exercises are the ones that you attach your ego to. That can really be any exercise, but for a lot of people, like you said in the question, it does end up being an exercise like the bench press. And that's because people get so obsessed with improving their numbers on the lift that they let their technique slip, or they handle weights that they can't really handle with good form. And that's when exercises become problematic. So I don't think that there are any exercises that you specifically need to avoid. Everyone's biomechanics and anatomy is a little bit different. So it really does come down to self-experimentation, but I think it's a kind of bad mindset to go into the gym with the expectation that there's these exercises over here that I really need to avoid because they're going to mess me up, and these exercises are really good. All the common exercises that we do, I think, are safe and can be included in any complete routine. All right, so guys, as I was shooting, the loudest cockroach or cricket of all time started cricketing, so you guys might have heard that in the last question. Anyway, I'm going to finish off 2 more questions and we're going to wrap it up. Any suggestions for how to fit playing basketball or a cardio-intensive sport around a linear progression program or novice lifting program with a strength focus? So I'm going to try to answer this as quickly as I can. Anytime you're trying to balance cardio and strength training, you need to think of 3 main factors. Frequency, so how often are you doing cardio? Intensity, how intense is it? And the mode. So the more often and the more intense and the higher the impact of the cardio, the more likely it is to interfere. So you take something like swimming or even cycling, those are very low impact cardio activities, so you can probably get away with a higher frequency and a higher intensity on those and not have it interfere with your training. Basketball is actually pretty high impact, so you want to have a slightly lower frequency and maybe a lower intensity. So for me, when I play basketball, I try to limit it to maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and I don't play all that hard. Like, I'm usually just shooting around by myself, especially now with COVID and everything. So those are just variables that you need to try to moderate for yourself. And as you think about those factors, you need to assess your own recovery. So are you still progressing? If you're on a linear program and you're still getting stronger week to week, then you're probably not overdoing it with cardio. But if on the other hand, you notice that your progression is slowing down, maybe you're feeling a little bit banged up all the time, you're more sore than usual, your joints are a little achy, maybe you're also not sleeping as well, maybe your motivation is a little bit lower, that could be an indication that you're putting too much of a demand on your body and you need to reduce one of those outputs. So maybe pulling back on the cardio once a week, or maybe reducing the intensity of the cardio would be a good idea. You can always switch to lower impact cardio as well, but if there's a sport that you play or that you like more than others like me, then sometimes you just have to deal with the higher impact nature of it. So I'll leave it at that for that question. Let's see. Okay, when's the power building program coming out? I probably am gonna need another month to get all the content ready for that. I'm trying to make it by far my best program that I've ever launched. It's gonna be super comprehensive. There's gonna be more that comes with it than just the program. I'm really trying to make this one something special, so I'm taking my time with it. I think in about a month, maybe a little more, it should be ready to go, but I'll let you guys know. And I might do a pre-order with it as well. But I'll definitely make sure I blast it out everywhere. Okay, I'm gonna finish with this question. Who's meeting in the NBA Finals and who's taking it? I think it's gonna be the Toronto Raptors and the LA Lakers. I think the Raptors are gonna win in 6 games. So I'm sticking to that. I know you guys are gonna hate, but I've gotta support my Raptors on this one. If it wasn't gonna be the if I wasn't super biased in favor of the Raptors, I'd probably say Milwaukee and the Clippers. I don't wanna say the Clippers though, because I know the Raptors will have a harder time beating the Clippers. I could also see the Denver Nuggets being a sleeper pick. Dallas Mavericks are playing really well. And out of the East, the Celtics could be an option as well. But I'm hoping it's Raptors versus Lakers, because I think the Raptors could actually take the Lakers. It's possible. And I would love to see the Raptors win. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you guys all here in another video very soon.